The trust in police that protect and serve their communities is vital to decreasing stress from violent crimes. Gallup is a global analytics firm that tracks such questions as these. A recent poll from Gallup shows that 56% of white adults have confidence in the police, but only 19% of Black adults have confidence in the police. With Mississippi having a significantly higher percentage of Black/African American adults than white adults, their lower violent crime rate could have a larger impact on the population due to lack of trust. More recently, states have begun to legalize recreational marijuana. Colorado is one of those states, whereas in Mississippi, recreational marijuana is still illegal, though in November 2020, medical marijuana was passed. The National Institute on Drug Abuse stated that people who use illegal drugs are more likely to commit crime, including violent crime. While there are many possible connections between drug and violent crime, the Bureau of Justice Statistics found that in 2004, 16.6% of state prisoners and 18.4% of federal prisoners committed their crimes for drug money. With recreational marijuana legalization being so new, it is harder to tell the influence on violent crime rate and subsequently the effect on obesity. The fact that obesity has many contributing factors is evident from the results of this project, where 2 social determinants of health were both statistically significant between the least obese and the most obese state. It is not possible from the data analyzed in this study to determine which affects obesity more. This would be an area to be more extensively studied to see if this is the case, to better understand the relationship between these social determinants of health and obesity. And I would like to thank my advisor, my preceptor, Michelle, and my family who is here today and my family who is not. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I also wanted to mention that we're going to go ahead and hold questions to the end of the session. So we'll have a total of 4 students present here. And then at the end of the 4 students, we'll open it up to any questions on any of their presentations. Elizabeth, you did a wonderful job. You did a really insightful analysis. And I think that you should be proud of the work that you did.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and move on to the second student in this group. This is Leah. She studied such a timely topic. I thought she was a genius for thinking of this way back in April, May, when we started working on our research projects. And that was right at the time when we were starting to get the school closures for COVID. And she really wanted to look at how those school closures were affecting the meal service. Because as we all know, although schools may be closed to in-person learning, they're still providing really important service by providing meals to students. And so she contacted food service directors, managers, many of those are registered dietitians, and asked them about how the food service had changed related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so obviously her results are still really relevant to helping out today when we still have a lot of schools that are closed due to COVID. And so Leah's presentation was titled, "The Effect of COVID-19 Mandated School Closures on Meal Services in West Michigan."
Thank you for the introduction, Dr. MacQuillan. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So my name is Leia Cywka, and my topic was focused on exploring the effect of COVID-19 school closures on school meal service in West Michigan, and more specifically in Kent County, Michigan. And when reflecting back on when schools first closed in March of 2020, the first thing that might come to mind is classrooms and transitioning to online learning. But another huge component of the education system is school provided free and reduced breakfast and lunches. And free and reduced breakfast and lunch is provided through the National School Lunch Program and the School Breakfast Program. And students are eligible for these programs based on household size and family income. And if they're eligible, it means that a need has been identified for food assistance. And in Michigan and Kent County alike, 50% of all K-12 students are eligible for free or reduced lunches. So it's pretty prevalent. And even further, with the effect of the pandemic, many families have likely experienced some degree of financial hardship, whether that be loss of income or loss of employment, and are now finding themselves in need of or qualifying for food assistance. So this is where food service directors and school food service teams stepped up to completely alter their service model and create something that's compliant with all of the new guidelines related to COVID-19. And school closures of this nature are pretty much unprecedented. There has been some regionally and briefly for influenza outbreaks and natural disasters. But basically, the school food service directors and teams were responsible for completely pivoting to a to-go meal distribution model from their cafeteria model. So this research was aimed at kind of addressing their experiences and the methods they used, along with some potential barriers that might have occurred. And this was a mixed methods exploratory study, and it targeted food service directors of K-12 public school districts in Kent County, Michigan. Data was collected using an online survey, and they were distributed via email. The surveys were anonymous, so they could not be tied back to any individual school district. But in total, there were responses from 12 food service directors, meaning the data is representative of 12 school districts in Kent County, Michigan. And the collective responses were analyzed using descriptive statistics, and then to examine potential relationships between the data, cross-tabulation analysis, along with Pearson's chi-square test was used. And relationships between participation and free and reduced lunch eligibility, percentage of students, and delivery model were analyzed, along with the relationship between potential supply chain disruptions and ability to serve meals. And what was found was, even though 100% of students now were able to receive these meals because of the waivers provided by the USDA, allowing for all students to receive meals during this pandemic, 7 out of the 12 schools reported they had 50% or less participation, and that is visualized in figure 1 there to the right. And from the data collected, there was no significant associations as to why participation was around 50% most commonly. And on average, between these districts, there was 56% of students eligible for free or reduced school lunches. Also, 75% of the districts also reported that they provided meals for the weekend. So 2 meals a day, along with 2 meals a day for Saturday and Sunday. Districts reported that serving multiple meals at once, as well as serving multiple days a week, were helpful in trying to accommodate students and their families and their varying schedules. Another helpful strategy identified was communication. Districts supported using multiple communication methods, including email, phone calls, US mail, and online resources such as parent portals. Varying delivery models were also used, and most districts used drive-through and walk-up delivery or distribution. And as shown in figure 2, drive-through was the most common, where parents or guardians could come drive up to the school site or community site and receive the meals for their students. And one district, interestingly reported, they used a school bus delivery method where the school bus drove along the typical route and was able to deliver meals to the students' homes. And finally, because of the very evident supply chain disruptions that occurred early on in the COVID-19 pandemic, that was inquired about as far as did it stop the schools from being able to distribute meals timely and being nutritionally complete. And 67% of the districts did report that they had experienced one or more supply chain disruptions. But because of the waivers provided by the USDA, they were able to still provide a nutritionally sound meal, but that varied slightly from the typical meal pattern. So they were still able to be reimbursed for the meal and distribute the meals, although they did not meet the typical National School Lunch Program pattern. And finally, as an exploratory study, results reveal some important information about the processes and experiences of the food service directors during this transitional period. And although no significant associations were found, this is somewhat comparative to other recent studies that have shown results that have no real clear pattern between participation rates and other variables like days meals are served or number of locations meals are served at. And as time goes on and further studies are conducted, perhaps other variables could help to identify exactly what the barriers are. And limitations of this study include that an online survey was the method of data collection. Had interviews been conducted, further information could have been elicited, but due to time constraints and social distancing precautions, in-person interviews weren't an option. And furthermore, further studies could look into the experiences of families and students during this COVID-19 pandemic and where they acquired food from or what their experiences were with food acquisition during the pandemic. And I would like to thank Dr. MacQuillan, along with my preceptor, Melissa Alley, and my family for all their support and helping me through this program. Thank you.
Great job, Leah. We'll have time for, I don't know, some clapping and congratulations at the end of all the sessions, but you did a wonderful job and you should be proud of what you've done. And I hope you have the chance to disseminate it because I think it could still be useful to people involved in school closures to this day. So next I would like to introduce the third student of our group of 4. Her name's Shayla Gallagher, and she was able to conduct some survey research looking at patient beliefs and experiences of probiotic use in the treatment of specifically metabolic syndrome, which is something that affects a lot of our patients as registered dietitians. And so it's important work, and I'd like to go ahead and introduce and turn it over to Shayla now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. So prior to going into my study, I'd like to talk a little bit about metabolic syndrome and what it is, just in case people do not know. So metabolic syndrome is not a single disease, but rather a compilation of cardiovascular risk factors. So there are several different definitions of metabolic syndrome, but I'm going to use the World Health Organization definition. According to the World Health Organization, there has to be insulin resistance in addition to low HDL, or in addition to 2 or more of the following. So that would be low HDL, which is your good cholesterol. That has to be less than 35 for men or less than 40 for females. High triglyceride levels, high hip to waist ratio, a BMI greater than 30, and then also blood pressure greater than 140/90. So now I'll jump into it. So currently, approximately 1/3 of US adults are diagnosed with metabolic syndrome, or MET-S. So there's been an increased interest in the prevention and treatment of it. So research has found that the use of probiotics can have beneficial effects on metabolic syndrome, such as decreased blood pressure, decreased blood glucose, and decreased triglyceride levels. Currently, there is not enough research conducted to fully understand the effects of probiotics on metabolic syndrome and its components long-term. So the objective of this study, probiotics are known for their benefits on gut health and immunity, but little is known about their effects on metabolic syndrome long-term. So this study was designed to assess beliefs and experiences with probiotics on metabolic syndrome. As for methods, this is a qualitative study that employed an online survey through Qualtrics for data collection. The survey was distributed through Facebook on August 10th of 2020 and was available until September 18th of 2020. There's no exclusion criteria, so no one was excluded based on age, gender, or race. The study included 81 respondents, but the number of respondents did vary depending on the nature of the question. It was mostly multiple choice and fill in the blank. Some questions include, have you taken probiotics before? What were your experiences? What forms have you taken? And who recommended, or why did you start taking probiotics? So I did do some of my analysis through SPSS, but most of my analysis was done qualitatively by identifying themes through inductive coding and reporting on the major themes identified. So what my survey found was that a majority, or 86% of the respondents, had used probiotics. When asked what the respondents knew about probiotics, most participants, or 40.9%, knew at least 3 out of the 6 true statements, with most of them knowing the effects probiotics have on gut health and digestion. So the most commonly known facts about probiotics were better digestion, improved gut bacteria, and improved immune system. However, not as many of the respondents knew about probiotic effects on blood glucose, blood pressure, or triglycerides. So unfortunately, none of my respondents reported that they were ever told they had metabolic syndrome. When asked if they had ever been told they had type 2 diabetes mellitus, hypertension, and high cholesterol, a majority did not. So this implies that it was a relatively young and healthy population who took the survey. Most of the respondents began taking probiotics on their own, so they were not recommended by a healthcare professional. These results coincide with answers reported in question 6 asking, why did you decide to start taking them? Most of the respondents began taking probiotics to improve their gut health and digestion. The next majority had specific reasons, such as gas, constipation, yeast infections, bloating, stomach pain, IBS, candida, and regular bowel movements. So the most common form of probiotics consumed was food form. If you can look at the figure 1 at the bottom, it's kind of small, but the most consumed form was yogurt, next being capsule. After that is drink form, so something like kombucha. Then we have kefir, and then we have fermented vegetables, so like sauerkraut. Then we have gummies, and then powdered dairy and a chocolate drop, all tied with 1 response. So like I said, the next most consumed form next to food was capsules. Of those who reported taking capsules, the most popular brands were Culturelle, Garden of Life, Digestive Advantage, and Nature's Bounty. So overall, probiotics were very effective for this group and are associated with positive experiences. Respondents noticed differences such as improved bowels and digestion, more regularity, and improved bloating, gas, and IBS symptoms. So in conclusion, due to the diversity and complexity of probiotics, I think research should continue to better understand the benefits long-term. I really think there needs to be an emphasis on form and dosage. When I was doing my research, every research or every study used a different form or a different dosage. And so we couldn't really come up with any conclusions. So I think there needs to be a better or an emphasis on this to determine if these factors affect the desired outcome. So the results from this survey imply that more education needs to be provided to not only healthcare providers, but also the public regarding other benefits of probiotics besides improved gut health. So with a better understanding the wide variety of benefits that probiotics have, healthcare professionals can make science-based educated recommendations to their patients or clients. Continuing education would be a great way for healthcare providers from all different disciplines to do this. In addition to healthcare professionals needing more education, I really think that retailers need more education on probiotics as well. With a proper education, they can help consumers understand probiotics better and possibly help them find one that's best for them. And this could be provided by probiotic supplement companies or professionals who specialize in digestive health. So the biggest limitation to this study, of course, was that none of the respondents had metabolic syndrome. I was pretty disappointed about this, but I did get a lot of good feedback, and I've learned that there needs to be more education and more research done. So if I were to do this study again in the future, I would definitely recruit people who have metabolic syndrome as participants. I also could have had this survey available a little bit longer to possibly improve the respondent outcome. But that is it. I just want to thank my advisor, Dr. MacQuillan, and Karina, my preceptor, for their ongoing support and input for this project.
Yay, great job, Shayla. You should be proud. I hope you can present this somewhere else, like at Michigan Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, or maybe even the national. That would be awesome. All right, so then moving on to our last of 4 students to present this session. And remember, we'll have time for questions at the end of all the 4 students presenting. Our last student is Tristin, and she looked at basically the environment that we're in college. She looked at the college campus and wanted to gain some information about what types of knowledge that undergraduate college students have about using nutrition facts labels. And she's able to make some recommendations based on her results for dietitians working with students in that age group, or for instructors teaching nutrition to that age group. And so I think that's really important work. And so the title of her research project is Assessing Undergraduate Students' Use, Interpretation, and Interest in Nutrition Facts Labels in order to inform targeted education efforts. And so I'll go ahead and turn it over to Tristin now.
Hi, thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. All right, so thank you, Dr. MacQuillan, for the introduction. My name is Tristin Geshwender, and the title of my project was Assessing Undergraduate Students' Use, Interpretation, and Interest in Nutrition Facts Labels in order to inform targeted education efforts. And by targeted education efforts, I mean dietitians that work at universities as well as college nutrition professors. So a little background on nutrition facts labels. Nutrition facts labels have been on food items since 1990, when the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act was mandated, which gave the FDA authority to require nutrition labeling. And nutrition facts labels allow for the public to understand what they are consuming, but many people never receive any formal education on reading nutrition facts labels. So some of the things included on labels include serving size, calories, macronutrients, so carbohydrates, proteins, and fat, some of the micronutrients, the list of ingredients, and percent daily values. So the goal of this research study was to get an understanding of the use of nutrition facts labels among undergraduate students and kind of to see what was confusing to them in order to inform education efforts. Moving on to the methods, I was able to talk to the dietitian that works at Grand Valley State University, and I kind of asked her what types of questions I should include on the survey that would be able to help her as she educates students in her role as a dietitian at a university. So that was really nice. The survey was created on Qualtrics, and the email invitation was sent out to GVSU undergraduate students through the Office of Institutional Analysis. And this research study was approved through the Institutional Review Board of Grand Valley State University. So the survey consisted of 12 questions, both open and ended questions. And some of the examples of the questions I asked were, how frequently do you read the nutrition facts labels? Which macronutrient has the highest calorie per gram? Choose the top 2 to 3 categories on the nutrition facts label that you pay most attention to. And then I also showed 2 ingredient lists and asked which one they thought would be considered more nutritious. And then I also asked several calculation questions, which you can see on the top of the 3rd column. Moving on to the results. So the survey received a total of 320 responses. 97.4% of students were able to correctly calculate calories in 2 servings of ice cream. 98.4% of students were able to correctly calculate calories in 1 cup of ice cream, which is kind of ironic that I used ice cream now that I say that. But 60.1% of students chose true when asked if the serving size is how much should be eaten in 1 sitting, which is actually incorrect, leaving 30.8% who said false, which would be considered correct, and then 9.1% who selected unsure. And then 38.1% of students were able to correctly identify that fat has the highest calorie per gram, which for reference, fat has 9 calories per gram, carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram, and protein also has 4 calories per gram. So 15.6% of students said that carbohydrates had the highest calorie per gram. 9.4% of students said that protein had the highest calorie per gram, and 36.8% said not sure. Also for reference, I asked what their major was. So 45.9% of the participants that took the survey had a health or science major, 40.3% had a business or education major, 5.9% had a creative arts major, and 7.8% were undecided or had an other major. On to the conclusion. So based on the high correct response rate on the calculation questions, the 97.4% and the 98.4%, it was concluded that students do understand how to use the label to correctly calculate calories and serving size. And due to the high incorrect response rate on the macronutrient with the highest calorie per gram question, it was concluded that undergraduate students may not understand how calories on the nutrition facts label are calculated using the 3 macronutrients. And then similarly, due to the high incorrect response rate on the serving size question, it was concluded that students may need more education on serving size and its meaning on the nutrition facts label. So in conclusion, I feel like the takeaways from this research for nutrition educators should be that students do have a good understanding of how to calculate calories from serving size and vice versa. Students may need more education on how calories are calculated using the 3 macronutrients. And students may need more education on serving size and the differences between serving size and portion size. And that is it. I'd like to thank Dr. MacQuillan for being my advisor, and Megan Ponke. She was the dietitian that I talked to through Grand Valley, and she was my project preceptor. And then my family and my boyfriend.
Great job, Tristin. And let's go ahead and unmute and have a round of applause for all the presenters. I think everybody did a wonderful job. And I'm very proud of you. And we'll go ahead and open it up for any questions. You can use the little hand raise thing, or you can just go ahead and unmute and ask a question of one of our 4 students. I can go ahead and get the questions started. All right. So my first question is for Elizabeth. So you were limited a little bit in that you used previously collected data. So you were you had to use what was available to you. So if you could have any data points, like any kind of different information, so not just the data that you had to analyze, what would you like to have available to you, or what would you like to collect if you were to go back and kind of redo the study to try to get a better sense of what is really happening between the most and least obese states with regard to the social determinants of health? Have you thought about any other types of information that would have been really helpful to help kind of separate those two from each other?
I think when I started looking at the difference between violent crime rate and the community's maybe their sense of security based on their difference in ethnicity or race, I think it would actually be kind of interesting if this was done more as a survey type situation, because then you could see what people's perceptions are of what their life is like just as an example, like college students maybe are not necessarily, depending on, how much money they take in and what their expenses are, they may not be like considered like low income or something like that, but the way that they budget themselves and that they restrict how much they spend, they could view themselves as having not a lot of money to spend, and that increases their stress and their concern about where they stand. So I think that there's something to be said for your mental outlook on how your life is and what your social determinants of health are, instead of just what the actual definition is. So that would be interesting to see if that, like, then maybe compare it to the data I did have and like see, does their perception change based on the differences?
Yeah, very true. And also, if you had prospective data like that from a survey, you would be able to say more about cause and effect rather than just association. So I think that's definitely something to go ahead and do once you're being paid as a dietitian in your next job, right? Any other questions for any of the presenters?
Can I ask a question to Shayla?
Sure.
I'm just really curious where you got that idea, because I'll admit, like, that's really how I view probiotics, is gut health and immunity. Like, I would have never ever thought that. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, when we were like doing our literature review and stuff, I've always had an interest of probiotics or in probiotics. And I came across a bunch of research that had found that it could possibly be beneficial for your blood glucose, your triglycerides, and your blood pressure. And I had never heard that before either, but I just thought it was super interesting. No one really, if I remember right, none of the research really looked at metabolic syndrome as a whole, but more looked at each of the components individually. So I kind of had to wrap that up. But yeah, I just came across it. It wasn't anything that I had really thought about. I had heard that probiotics help with your overall health. So I just kind of dove into it a little bit more.
That's really cool.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Any questions for maybe for Tristin or for Leah?
I have a question for Leah. I put one in the chat. I work for the Michigan Department of Education, so very much in my interest category. And actually, Leah, nice job. And wondering if you would share your research with MDE. Like, I'm wondering, like the survey that you did, how did you develop those questions, and what are some of those? Because I'm thinking it would be nice to do it statewide.
Yeah, she could share her paper with you if you put your email maybe in the chat, because I think she has an appendix to her paper that includes the survey questions, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I could definitely send that over. I have all the survey questions listed at the end of the paper. And, looking back, I kind of thought of better questions to ask during, when I was analyzing the data and wondering, this would have been helpful, to see the association between those two things. But I asked about like days they were distributed and kind of methods that were used to see whether there were any, significant associations between that to help with participation. But overall, I think that it was kind of right on with the other studies that I found since COVID has started. They were about at 50% of participation rate. So curious as to why, but perhaps we'll find more with future studies.
Yeah, and that is what we're finding, is that a lot of districts are like half the participation that they've had. Did you have any, like, I know you said it was an anonymous survey, but any like size of the districts that responded, or their like free and reduced percentage, to know if they were higher need or not?
I do have not the size, but the free and reduced percentage. I did ask that as a question, and there was no association between that either. But yeah, I can send you over all that data as well. But because it was anonymous, yeah, that's another thing that I was questioning. And then as far as like the demographics of the school district that responded. So a bit of a mystery, but yeah.
So were there
Thank you.
more rural and more urban districts? Because that was a question that I was going to ask too, if you didn't have a different question about it, which was just, about that 50% participation rate and whether or not the delivery would have really changed that. Obviously, the one district that you said did deliver meals probably had a higher participation rate for that reason. But I just wondered about if transportation was maybe an issue in rural districts.
Yeah, I didn't ask a question as to rural or urban, but I believe that all of Kent County was classified as urban. But that would have been interesting to see as well. I think just further kind of getting information on the demographics or people that are participating in the program would have been helpful insight into the project. So I'll definitely keep an eye out for future studies on the matter.
Thank you. And thank you, Emily. I appreciate you attending. Make sure you get your CEUs.
I just had a quick comment that might help Leah and Emily. I know I live up in Traverse City, Michigan, for TCAPS, and there was one restaurant that served meals themselves, like free meals to students. And that was very, very popular. They served like, I think it was like 400 meals a day or something. So I don't know if parents were like doubling up and going to both because the schools were offering the meals as well. But I know that was like really popular. I don't know the difference in what was served, but that might be something to look at too.
Yeah, I would agree. I know Detroit public schools, I mean, they are way low on the number of meals they serve every day. And it's partly because there are a lot of other groups that are serving meals and have it available. So interesting factors.
Yeah, and at the time I distributed the survey was September. So some of the data was likely coming from that 2019-2020 school year where that pandemic EBT was also distributed. So they could have been using those funds to purchase meals, and that could have played a factor in participation as well.
No, that's a good point. Do we have any other questions from people who are attending? Okay. Well, you know, Tristin, I'm not going to let you get away without at least one question. So I wanted to ask, why do you think the serving size was one of the most misunderstood pieces of the nutrition facts label? And how do you think maybe the label could be changed to reduce the misunderstanding about that? Because the way it's presented, it does kind of seem like that's what you should consume.
Right, yeah. So most people thought that serving size is how much you should eat in one sitting, but serving size is actually how much the people eat like normally. That's how they created serving size, is how much people would eat normally. But I mean, I feel like probably just more education on what actually serving size is, maybe changing it to portion size instead of serving size on the label. I feel like people have a better idea of portion size is how much I should eat. Serving size, it's kind of has its own definition. Yeah.
And aren't serving sizes standardized like for based on the type of food? So like I think for ice cream, it's half a cup no matter what type, or
Right.
cereals are 3/4 or a cup. But I had read something about how some beverages, like sugar sweetened beverages, the serving size was there was some discussion about changing that, just because you can get into the situation where you have like one container of a beverage, but it might actually be 3 or 4 servings, you know, but you
Right.
have to look at the label and do the math to kind of do that. So that's interesting. And they do change the food labels. I mean, they just recently changed and they continue to change. So it's this kind of research that kind of lets us know what things are being misunderstood by the public and kind of what we might want to look to change in the future. So
Yeah, I definitely think that changing the serving size, I'll have to think about it more, but changing it somehow to make the public understand what the serving size really means would be something that they should consider within the next revised
Mhm.
label.
Yeah, awesome. Good job, everybody. Do we have any other questions before we go ahead and wrap up the session? Okay. Then seeing none, I would like to again congratulate all the students for their hard work. Preceptors, if you scroll to the top of the chat, you'll see the Google link where you can submit your information for CEUs for attending. And yeah, just another round of congratulations for all the students. I think you did a wonderful job. Thank you for your time. And we can go ahead and conclude the session then. Thank you.